Hello, everyone, and welcome into Swarm Talk. My name is Bryce Koon. We are so glad that you're a part of us tonight. Bryce Koon, Swarm Talk, Georgia Tech Talk Show, and it's a big one. Ladies and gentlemen, pumped that you are here with us tonight as we talk the portal plan for Georgia Tech. Going to be a loaded one, and we've got some good stuff to cover tonight, like who's in, who could keep going, all these different things. First, I want to start off with telling you that you need to subscribe to the channel. You need to follow on social media, and you check us out at thecrowdedbooth.com, and also check out our sponsors, the presenting sponsor, Section 103. It's portal time. College football, the transfer portal has officially, let's get the camera placed correctly, officially opened up. And it brings us to... Out of the loop, what's the white star mean? Sorry, I'm reading some of the comments here. Matt, become a member of the channel. Right down below, you can see how you become a member of the channel, and we would appreciate you if you did. It's just to support the channel and also be a part of a great community we have over here at the Crowded Booth. You guys have done great on shows, and we hope you continue to support the show here, even in the off season as we get ready for a bowl game. We're going to talk about that. What does it mean, and what does it do for a bowl game? A lot of different things that we're going to get to, and it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about it here tonight. Let's start, though, with your portal questions. And one of the biggest ones is who's gone / what is the impact here for this team as they get ready to head into 2023. We have a short list of players that have entered the portal, and this is as of about an hour ago. Kyle Kennard, obviously, we're going to talk about him. Kenan Johnson already picked up offers both from Virginia Tech and Wake Forest. You also have offensive lineman Wing Green per the 24/7, which is something I think people kind of knew was going to happen way before the season ended. Wing Green, that offensive tackle. And then tailback Jamie Felix saw some time last year and kind of got buried on that depth chart here in 2023. Here are the people that you've lost, and we're going to talk about that. What is the impact of the people that you've lost? I think number one, you can sit here and say the person that had the most impact is a guy like Kyle Kennard. Kennard, with the absence of Keon White this season, is someone that, to me, it hurts you because, to me, losing Kyle Kennard hurts you because you were kind of thin at edge rusher, and he was a guy that produced for you. Now, look, you're going to get Sylvain Yonjuan back next season. I think that's really, really big, but you've got to have some playmakers. Kyle Kennard was kind of up and down. He had some massive performances. Then he had other ones where he just was kind of, I don't want to say not in the loop, but just kind of one of those players that disappeared at times and then also kind of rose to the limelight. Kennard was kind of off and on, and you saw especially whatever was opposite of Kyle Kennard after Sylvain went down. That was one of the big reasons for Georgia Tech's inability to get to the pass rusher in key moments or get to the quarterback as a pass rusher, and it hurt them, like hands down, no doubt about it. And so I think Kyle Kennard has the biggest impact in terms of what you have to go out and get. And we're going to talk about positional needs here in just a second and talk about that bowl game impact and the overall plan in the portal. You go then, you lose Kennard. He was a pass rusher for you. You're going to have to find some options for you to go and get the quarterback. Which, do you believe those are in-house, or is that something you can go out and get once again? Front seven is going to be huge. I'll tell you about that need in a little bit. We move on to Kenan Johnson. Johnson played a lot of football for Georgia Tech this year. He was able to carve out a starting spot. Johnson brings the table. You're already seeing him get Power 5 offers from both Virginia Tech and Wake Forest. I'm sure there'll be a couple more offers that roll in and trickle in for him among the same tier as a Wake Forest or Virginia Tech. Do not see Johnson, and we'll see what happens. Positional needs for teams, their big boards can shift as guys come off that board throughout the transfer portal window. Kenan Johnson decides that, he's not going to spend his last year at Georgia Tech. He's going to explore other options. Wing Green, it was kind of a loaded offensive line room, one that Key is, I feel like likes what he has, and Green just kind of didn't fit into the scheme. And look, for Wing Green, he needs to go get reps. He was not going to get them here at Georgia Tech. And so you kind of, I don't want to say it's a mutual parting of ways, but in these exit interviews that every single program does, it was probably shown to him and told to him, hey, look, here's our plan. This is where we view you. Wing wanted something a little bit more. And it was one of those things they kind of went their separate ways. And so I think for Green, I don't want to say you're not losing a lot. You're losing depth, obviously. But for Green, it's not one of those situations where you're going to have to turn around and say, oh gosh, we lost our starting left tackle or starting right tackle. Wayne Green, I think, is a solid football player that's going to find a home elsewhere. Then we then move to Jamie Felix, and really, the writing was on the wall for Felix once Jamal Haynes kind of moved to the backfield. Very similar style, I think, in the position of running back that they want. I think Georgia Tech really wants to have a not a bruiser, but an in between the tackle guy, which Haynes can be, but also a version of that scat back, that back that can make plays out of the backfield. Get on those on the perimeter and some of those outside runs. And that was what Jamie Felix was, towards the end of last season. Well, Jamal Haynes kind of assumed that role, and is a guy that uh, just burst onto the scene, and he's kind of the guy, the focal point leading into next season. So, Felix didn't feel like the opportunity was there for him. He moves on. I'm sure the conversations between Norval McKenzie and he, we're saying, here's your opportunity to be here, and if not, we'll help you find an opportunity elsewhere. So Felix, Wing Green, Kenan Johnson, and Kyle Kennard. What is the impact of that? Felix, you feel like you have the same player. You're going to bring in other players too that you feel like you can mitigate that loss. Wing Green hasn't really been a part of the offensive line plans, so you can't really say it's a massive loss in terms of what you had. Kenan Johnson, okay, you lost a starting cornerback. Secondary's been something that was not really a strong suit this season. So where do you kind of sit in that? You can probably find a player the level of Kenan Johnson out there in the transfer market, or maybe in house. We talk about Amari Harvey, a guy that kind of rose to the occasion, especially when Georgia Tech wanted to play against heavier run teams like the last two games of the season when Syracuse obviously ran the ball. Georgia ran the ball more than passing. So Amari Harvey was more part of the game plan. Has Harvey shown enough to be maybe that big name cornerback going into next year? We'll see. But I think that Kenan Johnson's a player that you're going to be able to find a suitable replacement for, whether it's in-house or through the portal. I think the biggest impact here is Kyle Kennard. I think it's a loss that hurts. We're not talking about a transcendent edge rusher here. We're not talking about a round one, round two guy like you were talking about day one, two, or day one or day two pick in Keon White. But you're talking about a guy that most of your production from the edge rusher position came from. And so this does hurt. Like it is right now, you are worse in that category than you were a week ago. Does it mean that you can't correct that? No, it doesn't mean you can't correct that. You can definitely go correct that, and we'll have to see. I do believe that's something they're going to look at too. So that is who we kind of look at who's gone and what's available here, going all together. You know, when you look at the portal plan, talking with some folks in and around the program about this, what would be the wish list? Okay, so let's start positionally here. Positionally, it's got to be defensive line and linebacker. I understand that there was a lot of concerns about the lack of play from the secondary at times this season. I think you can attribute a lot of that to not having a good interior and not having really great linebacker play. The defensive line has to be better. You got pieces. You have a guy like Zeke Biggers. You have a guy like Horace Lockett. You have pieces per se, and you have rotational pieces at the defensive line. You need to find the guy to anchor that defensive front. That is kind of where I think Georgia Tech sits on the defensive line. I think it's why you're going to see them pass on a guy, up until this point. We'll see. We mentioned over on the Discord, if you haven't joined, please be sure to. Great conversation we have over there. Steven Johnson, 6'4", 320 freshman from Auburn, enters the portal. Is a guy that we kind of reported was, interested in coming back to Atlanta and where he's from and playing for Georgia Tech. He was kind of interested the first time around. And right now, things trending. Obviously, these things can change. Like I mentioned, the big board of who you think you want to go for can change. So right now, Steven Johnson, not one of those guys that I think is in the plans, in the cards for Georgia Tech. But that could obviously change because I think that the mindset is you got to go get a high-impact guy. I'll tell you about why I think in the portal. So we've got defensive line here. What should, or we'll go here, the positions of need, and where does Georgia Tech look? You kind of look at defensive line being one of those that your run defense was terrible. So it starts in the middle, creating havoc, creating negative plays that you were able to do at times in 2022. 2023 was just you were not able to get a consistent push at times. You showed flashes, but you've got to be able to be more consistent in that factor. It starts defensive line. And I think it kind of, the second position we talk about here at linebacker fits into the overall theme of where this team has to get better at, and it's in the front seven. So many revolving door and so many revolving faces in that linebacker group, which I tell people, yes, you're going to have situational players. You're going to have a linebacker that you might feel is better in coverage on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7. Maybe you slot him in over a guy who's a primary run defender. But the way that Georgia Tech had to rotate guys wasn't out of a feeling of comfortable depth. Rather, it was an uncomfortable aspect of knowing you really hadn't found your guy. And we could all sit here and talk about, we talked about during the season, you really didn't find a stable player there until you found 44, probably week 7, week 8. By that time of the season, I just mentioned week 7, week 8, you're 8, 9 games into the season. So I really do think that if you're going to slot Kyle Eford at one of the linebacker spots, you have 3 or 4 other guys that figure to be a part of the plans. You still have a guy in Tyson Miguez who hasn't cracked the rotation. So where do you go in the department of linebacker play? You got to go look outside. Look, they may have one of the freshmen this past year, a guy like Ashton Heflin, who I really, really like. Jacob Cruz is another one that I think is really impressive. But do you feel comfortable slotting a guy who hasn't really played significant snaps of football into that position against Florida State and Ireland next year? Like, do you feel comfortable? Now, it's hard to make that justification and statement here on December the 4th. I understand that. What you're also hoping for is you would love those young guys to come up and compete and be that guy in the middle of your defense there at linebacker position. I think Georgia Tech needs to get a veteran linebacker. And it can't be where you went last year and you brought in 3 and Braylon Oliver, Andre White, and Paul Moala, and none of them really necessarily panned out in terms of – and look, it's nothing against the guys, but none of them truly kind of panned out in the sense of this is the guy we're sticking with for so many snaps per season or so many snaps per game. No, it was a revolving door, and that's not a spot you want to be in, nor is it really truly normal of where you want to be as a linebacker. So I just overall think that when you get to the linebacker position for Georgia Tech, you had Eford in the picture here. 44 is most likely, hands down, going to be starting for you. Who's opposite of him? Is it going to be one of the younger guys? Or do you need to go out and get a veteran guy that can provide a stopgap option as maybe a 1-year guy till these guys get ready? Or do you kind of look at a guy that maybe is a really, really good talent out of the group of 5 that you can bring up? Because you kind of went the route of Braylon Oliver and Andre White, and I don't want to say it didn't pan out. Like, those guys showed something. It just wasn't consistent enough for you to feel comfortable slotting that guy in there as the full-time starter. That's where I sit with that. So defensive line and linebacker, front 7 has to be overhauled from a player personnel standpoint for you to be able to compete where you want to be and improve upon the 6-win season going into next year. It just has to be a part of the equation, hands down. Now, we're going to talk about other options, but the third position I've got here, and this is, some notes and tidbits we were able to pick up here, is you start to kind of look at offensively. We switch it over to the other side of the football of where you can upgrade the most. Offensive line, I feel like they like what they have there. They might add, a guy, but I don't necessarily think that it's the most massive need. I think it's one they're going to try to continue to develop. Jeep Wade and staff try to continue to develop the guys they have on campus, and a lot of those guys are going to be able to return next season. You also look at the wide receiver position. Maybe you add a guy there where it can make an impact to alleviate some of the stress off of an Eric Singleton. But you also feel like you might have those guys in-house, and obviously everyone wants to monitor the health of Leo Blackburn. How does he come back, and can he make an impact? Can he get up to speed and play next season? That would be – because you think you know what he is, but can you get on the field to see? So running back is another one that may be an option for you. But I think where you can look at this offense and say, if we add a high impact player here, or I'm going to use the words high level, elite, whatever you want to talk about it. If you can find a playmaker at tight end, it really unlocks a lot for this offense. Buster Faulkner used guys like Dylan Leonard, who, tech man and fantastic in that sense. He used a guy like, Brett Seither, who I think was a good transition in year one to help teach the other guys what Buster Faulkner likes to do and what that group likes to do. Ralph is here. He's just showed up. He's still wearing the brown UPS uniform. Appreciate you, Ralph. But if you showcase what you can do with a tight end with the level of talent that you had this year, think of what you could do with, I don't want to call it a unicorn. There's only probably one unicorn tight end in the country, and he's on your rival's team. But if you can just find a tight end that's maybe a pass catching first guy and pair him alongside, a blocking first, you really kind of, I think, in my opinion, start to unlock some things offensively for this group because now you're having a perimeter threat. Now you're having a tight end that can make plays up the seam that you really can start to dial stuff up if you're Buster Faulkner. That I think is probably the next step in the evolution of the offense you want to take. You found legitimate receiver. You also know you have some other legitimate receivers and weapons. If you can go and get a playmaking tight end, maybe that's not the most it's not going to kill you to not have it, but that might be more of a luxury that you would love to have on this team for next season. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, Dylan Leonard's gone. You kind of look at what's behind him. Obviously, Jackson Long, the USF transfer, really didn't figure into any plans this season. Is that the answer? I don't know. What I will tell you is that I think Georgia Tech, and I'm going to get to the portal plan here in just a second, needs to have a best player available type of look at this when it comes to this position. If there's a good, solid tight end, the staff feels like they've evaluated, maybe it's a diamond in the rough, take a chance on them and see what you have. I think that'd be very, very interesting to see. Other options that I went with, those were the three that I was able to kind of gather for some intel and information. Yeah, running back. Like, you can look at this running back position if you're Georgia Tech, and you can say, okay, Jamie Felix is gone. You have Jamal Haynes, Dante Smith, Trey Cooley. Like, where do you want to go with this room? You're going to lose some of those players. You probably want to find, I don't want to use the term bruiser, like I said, but I think it'd be another good opportunity to bring in a guy that has veteran experience, depending on what Trey Cooley does. That's going to be the big kicker for me because I really think the staff loves where Evan Dickens is. I think I like where Evan Dickens is in his maturity and his growth and his development this season. You could roll into a group next year where you have those three guys and then you have the freshmen that you bring in. We'll see. It all going to depend on numbers. I don't think it's a dire need at the running back position, but I do think it's one where you could afford to upgrade and add to what has been a really successful run game for Georgia Tech this season. And it should be a talking point when you go out on these recruiting trails to these in-home visits in the portal and say, look what we just did. Come be a part of this. And also, we've seen, Brent Key has said this, running back has been a position or one of those things where running back has been one of the big positions that helps Haynes King out. Yes, receivers and offensive line do that, but for Haynes King to be his best, he's going to have a really good running game, as are 120 other FBS quarterbacks in the country. So I think that running back's a really important position, and we'll see. We'll see how that occurs as well altogether. So I got defensive line, linebacker, impact tight end, and running back. And then I'm going to stop, or those are the honorable mentions, I should say, running back. And then this next one is defensive back, where I think it's going to be an interesting room to gauge. Because, look, coaching changes could happen. They could not happen. And we'll talk about this more into the month of December about what this could bring to the table in terms of what you have to account for. It's a numbers game, all these different types of things. At the defensive back position, Jalen King is gone. So let's just call it for what it is. Right now you have Lamiles Brooks and you have Clayton Powell-Lee. If either one of those guys, one decides they want to move on, and or they get hurt, God forbid, in the season, what is your realistic depth behind those guys? Like, it's not really any players with that type of experience. And I said this last season. Clayton Powell-Lee filled in admirably his freshman year. But you're playing with fire if you just continue to expect to bring and promote freshmen and have that high level, that high standard of play year in and year out. I think that Georgia Tech could benefit from a one-year guy or maybe a guy with 2 or 3 years of eligibility that's looking to be developed in that safety room that maybe the staff says, we think this guy has more promise than some of the backups on our roster. Maybe that's a situation they look at. Cornerback position, I mean, the cornerback position is a weird one, and I think everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say it's a weird one. There's faces, there's names. Where do they go? It wasn't really great this year at times. I mean, I know you had some players that graded out well necessarily, but when you kind of watch the game with your own eyes and you really take into account the eye test, you got to get better there. And yes, improving the front seven is going to help that. But I really think that Georgia Tech needs to try to find a guy, maybe at the Group of Five level, that had a great year, that wants to take his level up, his step up, to try and boost his stock with an ACC schedule. That would be something that I think you would look at. So positional needs. I'm going defensive line, linebacker, impact tight end, running back, and defensive back. Running back, defensive back being those honorable mentions as well. Now let's talk about this because I've mentioned the names that have entered. I've mentioned the impact that those names are losing those names and what it means. I've mentioned positional needs. But let's talk about what should be Georgia Tech's portal plan. We talked about this last week when we did the Georgia postgame show, the Georgia Tech postgame show, clean old-fashioned hate postgame show. This fan base, especially in our Discord, you sit on two different sides of the aisle. One wants to call for a complete makeover, complete roster personnel coaching makeover. There's merit to that when you look at the stats. The other feels like you could potentially add around the edges. I'm going to tell you, and this is just personal opinion, what I think. I think Georgia Tech is going to be players in the portal, but I think it's going to be a selective process for this group. Yes, you need to hit on your additions defensively. You have to bring in the confidence that you were able to do offensively and bring it over the other side of the football because you really didn't do that this past season. You didn't hit on those guys. You have to hit defensively on your transfers. But I do believe that Brent Key and this staff feel like they are forming the core of what he wants his Georgia Tech team to look like. So I say that in the sense of I think that you have a guy in Kyle Eford who is going to be a multi-year starter at Georgia Tech. I think that you have guys up front that they feel like can be the core and the nucleus of a defensive line group. I even think that they feel like maybe on the back end of the defense, maybe some of the younger guys, maybe, if you get better up front, I think they still view LaMiles Brooks as a big part of the equation for their defense going forward. What I want to say, though, is I think that this group overall feels we have a core. How can we elevate this core? Where it's not we have to go into the portal and bring in a class of 17, 18 players. I mean, maybe they do that. I don't personally think they do. But maybe they take the tone here of we need to go get a high-impact defensive lineman who can not only be the leader of this room, but can also be a guy that is so impactful in what he does during a game that it truly makes a difference along every other member along the defensive line. Do I think that Zeke Biggers, Horace Lockett, and some of these other guys can be high-impact players? Yes. But if you're able to pull in a guy who has had a really, really successful season, and I saw in the comments, the defensive lineman from Penn, who's one of the top-rated defenders in the country in the portal, let's just play the hypothetical game. If you bring in that guy and his performance translates from the Ivy League over, you have your big disruptor. And now the stress, the stress pyramid, let's call it a pyramid. What you don't want here is you don't want all the pressure on one guy at the top. You want to even it out. So if you can add a high impact guy, I think for what that does is it makes Horace Lockett a better player. It makes Zeke Biggers a better player. It makes Noah Collins a better player. The burden is not is spread so thin that nobody truly feels it. That's what I think you have to do defensively. So I don't think it's where you're going to see this team be. We're going to take 3 defensive linemen, and they're probably just rotational pieces. Yeah, they may look at depth at certain positions, but I think that you have to be very strategic in how you use the portal to be able to bring names in that can make an impact at the linebacker position as well. So where does that mean you look? Okay, so for me, it means that do you want to look at the teams that are, Georgia Tech's about right here. Okay. There's the level above them, which is the SEC schools that are recruiting at a high level, the Big Ten schools that are recruiting at a high level. And then below them, there's several Power Fives, mostly Group of Fives, and the FCS ranks. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the FCS ranks are becoming the new JUCOs. FCS football is becoming the new JUCO, where a guy goes to the FCS level, plays for a year or two, gets his tape out there, and now you pick him up out of the portal as he maybe matures physically or mentally. So what I have to say on that is I think Georgia Tech would be very, very, and Ralph's in the background. I don't know if a Troy player qualifies here, but you need to go look at like the Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year, the MAC Defensive Player of the Year. Get the best player and not just some random Group of 5 player. But Georgia Tech needs to be casting their lines in the water of the best Group of 5 conference, or the Group of 5 conference's best defensive player. And that's who you need to add, in my opinion. Because I truly do believe, and Ralph says Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year is graduating, and Joey Slackman is that Penn defensive tackle. Very, very nice player. I think that's the waters, for me personally, I would love to hear your opinion, that you need to be fishing in. Because yeah, you can go get the guy that's struggling to get playing time at the Alabamas of the world and the Texas A&Ms of the world. I just think that we need to take into account a couple things. There's a reason that guy is in the portal, okay? It worked with Christian Leary, like you saw at different times. Andre White, like whether it's opportunity or whatever, it didn't work there. So I think it's hit and miss. And look, it's going to be hit and miss no matter what. The transfer portal is not a sure thing. Outside, Ralph, you corrected me, I would say, outside of the top 20, 25, and it varies each year, 20, 25 players, guys are in the portal because they're not happy with their situations because of maybe playing time. Once you get into like the 30th best player, the 35th, the 40th, 50th, you're sitting in a situation where it's a guy at Tennessee who's not happy with his playing time, been there for 2 years, can't get on the field, and wants to leave. I don't know if Georgia Tech's going to be swimming in the waters of a Walter Nolan. Like, I don't expect that. Walter Nolan is entering the portal. He's the number 1 defender in the country, in the transfer portal, I should say, because he knows he's about to cash in somewhere, whether that's a Tennessee, a Georgia, an LSU, wherever. All of those things to say is Georgia Tech, to me, needs to fish in the waters of the Group of 5 elite. And if they are going to take someone from the Power 5, the evaluation has to be so sound where it has to be, you, without a shadow of a doubt, know at the very least you're going to get a rotational player. Because I think you missed on some of those things. And you can't really afford, with the potential, and I'm speaking strictly on the defensive side of the football here, you can't really afford to take that chance if your offense continues to get better next season, but your defense still ranks 115th. Like, you can't take that chance. It would be a wasted year for Bussner Faulkner, Haynes King, and it'd be a bad opportunity. So I think that they hit offensively on some transfers. I think that they hit defensively on where they wanted to go on some transfers. But they didn't hit enough. And they have got to change the fortunes. Your evaluation has to be more sound. You have to have airtight evaluations if you're taking a kid from a Power 5 program. Look, I mean, I've seen it up close and personal. And Ralph knows this with the defensive back that LSU took, who was like the 3rd-ranked defensive player in the portal last year. And it didn't work out. It was a disaster down here in Baton Rouge. So if I'm Georgia Tech, like, I'm going back and looking at the Bowling Green game. And all jokes aside, that running back was a mauler for them. Like, he was a bowling ball. Their offensive line was NFL-size offensive linemen. And I'm going here. Linebacker, their safety, their cornerback played really, really well. Go look at the stats. If that's one of the conference's elite, go pick him up, because that is where you're going to have a guy that is using Georgia Tech as an opportunity to elevate. And I want to say this with this. It is very rare for a guy to make the leap like that and have super success. Georgia Tech was just spoiled because you saw that in Keon White. But that's a rare, rare thing to see. And I think Georgia Tech needs to fish in those waters again. Jared Verse is another great example down at Florida State of a guy that was, had the one offer from Florida State, takes it, and he's going to be, I mean, Ralph, I don't think I'm wrong here, a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. Jared Verse as a pass rusher. You good with that, Ralph? He says yes. So I just think that when it comes to where you look and what you look at, you have to have a airtight evaluation and you have to have great development. Those are the two things of the portal plan. And I don't know. I think that, like, we're going to talk here in a second about NIL. We're going to talk here in a second about the bowl game impact of this. I don't think there is a roster overhaul necessary for what Georgia Tech wants to be. I think you have some building blocks, but you really have to understand how you can supplement your roster the most effective way. Like, that's what you have to figure out here for 2024. What can we do that puts the best roster out there for 2024? Not that you're not going to look with future ahead. Like, you still have guys that you're going to have to re-recruit on your own roster. And I think they've done a good job of that so far. That you're going to have to lay out plans for, not just in the NIL ventures, but also plans of attack of how we plan to use you in our said scheme. But I don't think there needs to be a complete overhaul of this team to get where you want to get. There needs to be development. But we've also got to understand this, folks. Whether it comes to coaching, whether it comes to players, the firing and cutting of scholarships and the removing of players off scholarships and the constant cycle, that's not good for a team that needs to build and go somewhere. You shouldn't hope for that. What we should hope for is that a guy like Ashton Heflin develops into an all-ACC linebacker, that a guy like Jacob Cruz makes a massive impact next year, that a guy that you do bring in through the portal develops into what, I see a comment down there about what Keon White has become. That, for me, is where you have to have you can't have attrition constantly. Look, there's some good attrition. There's some good trimming of the fat, but you can't have where it's just so much turnover, and not even roster-wise. But that's why I think, and I'll just give my opinion on this, you can't just be so quick and willing to fire a coach when it doesn't work out immediately, because the hiring and firing of coaches does not mean a healthy program. It means a program in disarray. You don't want that. You should want this group to succeed. It's what I said 2 or 3 years ago when people wanted Jeff Collins to be fired. And I'll say that again. Like, I understand the frustrations from the fan base, but we should be doing is rooting for what's currently there to work instead of rooting for it to get out. Different story, different day, previous episodes. That's where I think they sit in this conversation. Now, I want to get to this because I was just talking on the phone all day with folks about this. How, as a program with Georgia Tech, do you build continuity? Do you build, I'm going to hurt some ears here, an elite level program? And I don't want to say it's quite simple, but I think that we get caught up in December 4th being transfer portal day. We get caught up in a lot of different things. But I think it's the natural accumulation of talent is what the best recipe for Georgia Tech is. To have a healthy cycle, to have a healthy program, you have to have homegrown talent. And at certain positions, you have to be able to develop on your own, because I'm going to tell you right now, what you're seeing in the portal is it feels like that quarterback is the most important position. And it is on the field. I'll guarantee you that. But some of the hardest positions to build in the portal are going to be offensive and defensive line for a couple reasons. If you're a really, really good player, you're going to command a lot of money, and you're going to be commanded from the top teams. See a Walter Nolan. See a Barry Alexander last year that went to USC from Georgia. Teams that have great success are going to be the teams that also have the longevity, that are able to organically build their offensive line and defensive line, especially the offensive line. And you say, well, what do you mean, Bryce? Because it's really, really hard to get really, really good line play. There's only so many, and Raph, you tell me if I'm wrong on this, I feel like there's only so many really, really good offensive linemen that make a difference for you. There's a ton of just average plug-and-play guards and tackles you can put out there in the field. But when these guys enter the portal, the demand is so high because the supply is so few. So for Georgia Tech in this situation is you have to hope for these guys that you brought in last class and you brought in this class, that they're being developed. I don't think Georgia Tech can survive by going in the portal every single year for offensive linemen. They're going to have to build that up organically. A great example of who's done that organically is Washington. Washington was able to do that, and then they supplemented certain positions that they needed to do. There's only a few teams that can go into each and every single cycle and open up their purse, open up their wallet, and say, we want this, this, and this, and this. Georgia Tech doesn't really play in those, in that realm. So organically building your offensive line from the high school ranks is going to have to be a way you go, because it's so rare to get elite offensive linemen and defensive linemen in that sense. And that's why you're seeing so few of those names. And that's why quarterback feels like there's a plethora of options, because you even go back to last cycle when the conversation was, Georgia Tech going to bring in a quarterback. We knew Jeff Sims went in. They brought in Haynes King. And it's nothing against Haynes King, but he was probably like quarterback number 8 or 9 on some better teams' boards because there was such a supply of them. So I just sit in the camp of where if Georgia Tech can organically build their roster, especially in the trenches, because you're seeing it right now, folks. I mean, go over to 24/7 Sports' transfer portal board. You can see it all over there. There's about 30 receivers with enough game experience to make an impact at Power 5 schools. So you can find those. You can find those guys. I don't want to say they're a dime a dozen because there's some special players. You can find a plethora of that in the portal. You just can't find really good offensive linemen. I think Georgia Tech found something with Connor Scaglione. I don't think that you can just fill out 5 guys on the offensive front and 3 or 4 guys on the defensive line every single year and cycle through that. So, and yeah, Ralph says Vandy has 2 of them. Will Shepard and the Humphreys kid, London Humphreys, I think his name is. Humphreys is a monster. Crystal balled to go to Georgia, actually. So that's where I sit with that. I think Georgia Tech has to be very strategic to supplement their roster in the portal. You can't just continuously ask for year in, year out, let's just overhaul everything. And you have to, at some point, build a framework and a foundation to where, and I'm not saying they're not doing this, but you have to build a framework and a foundation to where you feel comfortable to have your in-house development be the majority and the bulk of your roster, to where then you get into a situation where you can go add in a super talent. You can go fish in the waters where your NIL opportunities, lie. I want to add this too, because this is a challenge to the coaching staff. Was texting back and forth with some of our national recruiting experts today. And this was something, I asked the question, when you look at group of 5 programs, okay? Let's see, we got a text here real quick. I want to. When you look at these group of 5 programs and these lower power 5 programs that maybe don't fish in the same waters or have the same financial flexibility that the elite programs do, when you see that, it's like, okay, so what do you have to have? And I never really thought about it like this, but this is something that I heard today and I absolutely 110% believe. We talk about a coaching staff and specifically a head coach that is able to strike up the band, is able to strike up the donor base and get them really, really excited. I will even venture further in this. I think that you have to have a head coach and a coaching staff and leadership in general that is able to take advantage of the local economy and able to plug into that to say the lifeblood of this sport is now money. It's money, what can go, and people say, buy you a champion. Look, it's all legal. Whether you like it or not, it's legal. But I think that's going to be the next step for Georgia Tech, because I think the donors are fired up. I think they're excited about the direction. I think the leadership and the institute is excited. But now you got to dive back into the local economy. And that has been one of the biggest perks that Georgia Tech has claimed to have, is you get the great education, but then you also turn around and all the opportunities, not only with NIL, but with internships and potential job opportunities if football is not the path, that you have in Atlanta. They have to capture that, whether it's the Tech way NIL program, whether it's player personnel directors, whether it's whoever it is, or really, it's got to come from the top down. So whether it's Dr. Cabrera, whether it's Jay Batt, or whether it's Brent Key, understanding that the way the sport is shifting, you have to have such strong connections within the community, which your community happens to be the capital of the college football world and the capital of, really the Southeast. If you really want to get it, everything runs through Atlanta, when you're doing stuff in the Southeast. So you have to be able to capitalize on that, and you have to be able to kind of dive into what it means to not only be a tech man, not only have the degree, but all this stuff that we've talked about for 5 to 6 years actually needs to come to some type of fruition. There need to be partnerships. And I know there are, but it needs to be a big selling point. I think that's the next step when we talk about how can Georgia Tech reach a new level. You showed this year that you were able to kind of get to that 6-6 plateau. You were able to get on the float. Let's talk about this. When you were younger and maybe you're at the beach, you're in the ocean, or you're in the pool at grandma's house, or you're in the pool at Ralph's parents' house, and you're struggling to get on the circle float with the hole in the donut float. And you can't because the waters are really kind of topsy-turvy. That has been Georgia Tech the past 5-6 years. Not able to get up on the float. This season they finally did. So for right now, you're buoyant. You're on top of the water. You're floating. In order to swim, in order to dive, in order to do the more advanced stages of what you need to do, whether you're swimming or playing football in this sense, I seriously do believe that Georgia Tech needs to dive into these relationships. And I'm going to tell you, the past head coach had the right idea with this, of the marketing and branding of this. So now that you've had an ounce of success and you feel like you're kind of getting, not too wobbly on that float in the pool, and you want to push off into the deep end, you kind of have to have that. So that's where I sit with this. The whole portal impact. We've talked about what's gone, what's the impact of those guys, the positional needs. I do believe that the bowl game makes a massive impact, and I've been saying this. That is why the Syracuse game was the most important game up to date for me in the Brent Key era, because you needed to win that game to be able to get to bowl eligibility, to show recruits, hey, we're going to be playing, in December. It does mean something. Will Mannis talked about this last night on our show. Players like bowl games. That's why you saw the players kind of complain when they were going to Birmingham, and then get hyped when they were going to Tampa, because it's just you want to be able to enjoy the experience. You get the gifts and you get to participate in different outings and stuff like that. I just think altogether, when you look at this from a perspective of, can Georgia Tech improve and what's that portal playing, I think it just comes down to a couple things. NIL purposes, you really have to crank that up even more and connect with the city of Atlanta and have an understanding of the landscape of Atlanta. And I think they have people that do that, but I think it's very important for them to be able to not only maintain a level of success, but also position themselves with a foot forward in going forward. And the second thing is, I don't think there needs to be a complete overhaul of what they have going on, in sense of blowing up the defensive side of the football to try to fix this. I think you have pieces you have to accurately hit on the transfers that you bring in. Every team does. Every single team does. And you got to do that, also, I said, with the development of the homegrown talent and supplementing it. It's just not a winning recipe to go out there and haul in 25, 30 transfers every year. And I'll be honest with you, Ole Miss did it, and so did Missouri, and they're playing a New Year's Six Bowl. So, but I think that it's more an example of the great coaching they have. Because I think it's safe to say Eli Drinkwitz is a really good coach, and Lane Kiffin's a really, really great coach. Really, really good coach, however you want to view it. So I just think with those factors, it's what you have to bring to the table with Georgia Tech. But look, I mean, the portal's going to be interesting. You're going to have this window. You're going to have early signing day. You're going to have a bowl game. There might be, some potential staff changes that could arise. I just think altogether, when you get to it, you can't be happy with 6-6, and you have to tell yourself, what is the next level? Well, you have to have a plan in place to supplement, to get better. And you just really, I don't think Georgia Tech can afford. you just can't afford to miss again, because if you do, it's going to be a wasted season for the offense. I think the offense can take a next step. The defense has to be better. And so they've got to hit on those guys. Evaluations have to be airtight. And we'll see. We'll see. We're going to keep monitoring all this information also as well with up-to-date news. Make sure you join the Discord. Head over to thecrowdedbooth.com. Join the conversation. And if you haven't already, you want to support the show, you want to support the channel, just become a member right down there below. We have 2 levels that you can do. We're going to be doing some Q&As. We're going to be doing a lot of different things that you can be a part of if you are a member. We have 2 levels of that. Would love for you to join, support the show in any way you can. My name is Bryce Koon. This is Swarm Talk, the All Things Georgia Tech podcast here in the Crowded Booth. We can't wait to talk to you again. The way that you know we're going to be live again is you hit the subscribe button, you hit notifications, and it's going to pop up when we schedule these live shows out and when we go live. Thanks so much for watching. Like the video. It helps us in the algorithm. Completely free of cost to you. For Ralph Leary in the background back there helping me out. My name is Bryce Koon. Thanks so much for watching. Section 103. All-time sponsor, great sponsor. Check them out. Use code Crowded Booth for 10% off your first purchase. This has been an episode of Swarm Talk on the Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.